There we go. All right. Let's get into the stream today. We're going to be looking at just some wrap up on our sci-fi containment unit. A little bit of kind of like self-criticism there in terms of what we would want to fix still. We're going to be moving on to something else after that in terms of a character design, which we'll base on Dora the Explorer. So let's get into it here. Okay, so just to reiterate, where we got to with this containment unit. We got pretty far with the lighting. Something that I like to do for myself when I'm getting into, or maybe I'm switching gears to work on another piece at the same time as a current piece. I'll leave myself a little bit of a range of notes on what I want to get in there and fix, or what I have left to do, right? There'll always be something in a piece, no matter what stage of development, that I'll want to go back and tweak or change, okay? So, we can start a layer. Maybe you can call that layer markup. And let's just take that out of there, and then I'm going to label it red. Up there. So the point of this is just to point out things for myself, maybe make notes on what I want to change. So at a future time, I can come back and tweak those things without kind of opening up the file and at some point kind of trying to figure out what it is you were doing, say a week ago, a month ago, right? So it's really good to kind of put your own little markup layer in there. So for us, I would say the lighting pass that we did was very rudimentary. And we kind of wanted to just establish where the light was going. And so we used some very basic airbrush techniques to get that working. And so we stubbed that in pretty much. So one of the things that I would say right now is some of the bloom effects are still very rudimentary and not very indicative of the surface material and the way the light would bounce off of it in a polished sense. So, I could do something like that and then just write light, and I'll, write down whatever makes sense for you to make that clear. For me, it'll be light, and I know right now looking at it that I would want to finesse that. Okay. I'll put in glass shape here, or I'll just put glass. I'll know what that means. I'll put in texture here because our texture was kind of painted outside of everything. We'll go with texture fix. In terms of our reflection, I'll just put a little dot in there. I'll know that for me means I want a more, let's say, brilliant hotspot reflection from our light sources up above. I want a reflection in here. And I can probably draw one in there as well. Outside of that, I can point to these guys in terms of finish, especially the guys up in front, because there's just been a general color laid in over top. Outside of that, I would say we want to look at general polish. So at that point, that could mean anything. I would know that I would leave myself some time, and you never know how much time you have when working with a client. It can be a long time. You can get a piece back thinking you're finished with it, and they'll say, oh, we would like to spend some more time on this, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, or whatever, right? It might become a piece that they want to use for marketing material. So, that general polish can lead out into whatever. When you're working on your own work, it can be something that is, when it's undefined, excuse me, when it's undefined, it can be something that, you never know when it's finished. So it can be good at that point to get in there and actually put a timeline on it for you, like another week's worth of polish. Or if you have a specific quality bar that you're trying to meet, then maybe you could note that in that case. Okay, so you know, this is what I would do for students. This is what I would do for junior artists that I'm leading, is give them sort of those critique notes, right? Likely you'd have a little bit more of a conversation with the person then. So do what you can for your own. I mean, maybe take some voice recording notes for what you want to do. That might be easier for you. You can just save it in the same folder, whatever. Okay, so, but other than that, I'm pretty happy with where we got to here. I would say I could spend quite a bit of time on this piece, cleaning up some of the polish phase stuff. But it gives us a sense of where we're going with the design and what the general atmosphere is going to be for the piece. Okay, so let's start a new file. I think we'll go with a 4500 by 4500 starting square. I mean, one of the things you guys can think about when you're making art now is a lot of if it's going to be sort of for self-promotion, a lot of the stuff is better off being square for cell phone purposes, right? So Instagram, even I would say ArtStation is going to fit on a screen a bit better, or portrait, which is a little bit annoying if you want to make a landscape or environment piece, which would make more sense in landscape format. You know, that's just some food for thought. You don't have to do it that way, but you know, if you are putting a lot of your artwork on Instagram, then square pieces can really maximize the real estate on cell phone viewing, which is what a lot of people do these days, right? So we have to consider that. Now, Ron, how you doing? Hi, how you doing? Horror the Explorer. The Horror Explorer. Maybe we call it Gora the Horror Explorer. I don't know. Okay, so the idea here is that we're going to get into designing a character based off of existing IP. Now, this is something that I say a lot to students when they're out of ideas, right? Or they're not able to kind of work through maybe developing an IP or a character within an IP or large narratives. You can use existing IPs to kind of boost yourself into your own design, right? So in this case, we're kind of loosely thinking about Dora the Explorer, and we look like we look at a character like that. You get this kind of stylized body, where she's got a massive head and she's got this kind of weird bowl cut, right? And then these eyes, and little mouth and whatnot. So when I'm doing something like this, I would want to focus on whether or not I want to follow like within those footsteps. If I'm being derivative, I guess you could say, in the development of let's just save that, yes. If I'm being inspired, let's say, by an existing IP, I probably don't want to kind of borrow everything from that IP, right? So if I were kind of using Dora as an example, then, you know, I could get in there and say, well, is it the idea of Dora that I like? Is it the idea plus the stylization, some of the shape language, all of that I like? Or, you know, can I make my own version of this by just using this explorer personality as the progenitor of whatever the design is we want to produce? So so to get in there and think about that stuff, you know, we can start sketching. When you're sketching and you don't really know, you say you have this idea, it's very good to kind of start with thumbnailing, right? And so I've got this kind of brush out. We can lay down the sort of Dora the Explorer sort of, I might actually use a little bit of a sharper brush. Let's just kind of test a brush real quick. Yeah, that one's a little bit better for us. I want to keep my thumbnail. My thumbnail is not a huge, legal size piece of paper. It's small, and the whole point of the word thumbnail is that you're not putting a whole bunch of effort into a giant sketch right out of the gate. The side benefit of doing that is that you can't put a ton of detail in yet, right? We're dealing with the large detail, which would be like silhouette shape first. So with this design, we can start to kind of express what our character could look like. We could go with that sort of Dora shape where we got this kind of really wide head on the shorter body. Because we're not beholden to anything yet, we get to have a lot of fun kind of playing with this. So maybe she has really long legs and a short body up top, right? She might have more of a giant round head if we're kind of following through on some of that stuff. And what if she had a really wide body as well, right? Depending on who I'm working with and what I'm working on, I'll know some of these things beforehand, or I won't. And if I know a lot about what we want to achieve by the end, I might, not have to go as wide with the expressions in the thumbnails. But if you don't know, it's really good to just try everything to see sort of what starts to fit with what you like in terms of aesthetics. Still do the design notes on my work. It really helps me not get distracted, take time to reflect on your design work. Simple but effective. Yep, it's always good. I would tend to put post-it notes on my monitor working in studio, just so I don't forget certain things, or if I had a good idea but I'm not going to get to something later, then I can put a post-it note up and remember that, and then at some point I'll just take them down and recycle them. So kind of nice and easy in that way. So we're playing with shape here. We're playing with body type as well, right? So don't be afraid to switch gears if you feel like you're kind of running out of gas on something, right? Our Dora doesn't have to be, well, we'll call it our Gora. Gora doesn't have to be like the existing one necessarily. It's reasons why I kind of would go closer to the design in the beginning. Just get it out so you're not you're not stuck in the mold of the kind of inspiration. So we did that, but let's kind of break free from this now. What if she had like really long arms? One of the things might be good about this character that may be a paranormal investigator or something like this, right, is that she might look more like a skeleton. So what would that be like? Would it be better that she is actually kind of more human size but still stylized, where she has maybe really long legs and longer arms, right? That's potential. That's a potential in there. Maybe we would do something where she does have these kind of long limbs. I'm starting to creep up towards the top of the frame there a little bit. She might have these really long limbs, right? Long legs, and then the massive head, the massive sort of melon in there, right? So that could be a look for her. And I'm not getting caught up in details here. I'm kind of just getting familiarized with what my shapes could be and what the expression of that could be. Okay, like we might have one that let's get the kind of more realistic human out of the way, right? And this is not going to be something that's going to be representative too much of an actual stylized piece, but if I'm developing it on my own and I'm really trying to search for the right answer here, why not throw that in there? It can easily be canceled out if you feel like it's just, I don't really want to move towards realism. But even within that, within sort of like a realistic body type, you can do some interesting things with that. So we could have something of a small head, a small torso, and kind of cartoon large hips on her, or something like that, right? just to investigate sort of what that would be like. And then the next one might be, we do that again, but you go really wide, right? Put the hips there. We don't also have to make this a kid, right? So I'm making a paranormal investigator that's been sparked off of that. So I mean, what if the head was a little bit bigger, the rib cage was smaller, right? And you get this person that looks like this. You know, is my confidence in something like that firm? Not really, right? But I'm not doing any of this design work or this thumbnailing right now to, you know, be picking the final design. I'm just exploring again, just like Dora does. So we get that kind of going on. One of the things I do like about what we're doing so far, so I'm taking stock here. I do like the larger head vibe. I like the pushing the proportions into some more exaggerated places than kind of being stuck with the human form, right? We did that with the zombie character, and I want to switch it up this time, and so maybe I will travel a little bit more towards those exaggerated forms. Style from animation film, Paranorman, or Dora from Laika, or Tim Burton. Slenderman, Nightmare. Yeah, so like all of these things are the exact same process as looking at Dora, right? If I go, hey, I'm going to make a paranormal investigator in the Paranorman style, then I'm kind of being derivative of that. There's not much. I mean, I could basically go and look at their character cast range and then pick elements and just, you know, piecemeal it together, right? That's not much of a design challenge for the artist. It's more being kind of derivative. You're mixing and matching. So we take the theme of horror and the kind of, you could say, job or role of Dora, and then you just be grafting on a style from somebody else, right? And so let's think about that when you show your work to a client. They're gonna get it, right? You're not gonna hide anything from an art director. You know, they're generally, art directors are fairly well versed in modern media, and they'll just see that, oh, okay, you did this in Dr. Seuss style, or you did this in Paranorman style. You know, none of this was of your own design, right? And you can see that in certain popular artist work where, you know, it's maybe heavily influenced by a specific anime artist or video game artist or illustrator, right? It does become something where it's just fan art in a way, right? Rather than really trying to push into your own space and develop your own shape language and volumes and proportion, right? So, and what's interesting about this, like we'll talk about this as we go through the development of the character, we can start to think about how we would apply that to props or environment work, right? We did look at this with the environment piece where we took a realistic scene and then we applied some stylization to it. So we started to create some rules in there for the environment, but what would the characters look like, right? So that could be a part of your development of these kinds of characters there. I am just going to come through here and move these characters down so that their feet are all touching the same plane, their same ground plane, so that we can get a sense of what's happening there. Okay. Put these ones down a little bit more. So it's always good to kind of organize your drawings to see what's up. And so your client can very easily read things. Hello, welcome. What if the most disturbing disease of pandemics? Yeah, that'd be funny. It could be, right? It could be sort of like a monster educator. That could be fun. So we're kind of cruising through some of these types. For myself as well, like at this point, we've got a lot of kind of maybe the hips being heavy down low. What if the upper portion or the torso was a little bit wider, and then we went down to something that was a little bit more kind of slim at the base, right? What could that look like? So I might kind of drum up an idea of that, of what that could be in here. You know, the arms might kind of sit low, and maybe we have the most mild sort of break in the legs there. Still trying to be kind of different in the set as I go through, and so you can keep going with that stuff. When you go through a process like this, it does become increasingly difficult to be different about with the character, right? So you have to look for things that you haven't done already, and like I said, that can be a bit tough. So with her, you know, let's kind of investigate what a rotund body could be. Maybe the main mass is her midsection, and she might have sort of a small stocky head in there, right? So like really heavy set in that regard. Anything goes at this point, right? At least in this design. Like I said before, if your client knows more of what they want, then you know that is a lot easier to work with, because, well, it's more restricted at that point, right? Let's make this head really kind of low. So we got kind of that vibe going on. What else? Maybe what if she has bad posture or something? So I might have to turn the character a little bit to the side so that we see that. She might be kind of very stick-like, right? Very flat hips or narrow hips, with the head kind of hanging down, a little bit of a hunchback on her. I'd probably want to kind of slim this head down in this version, at least, right? She might be kind of like Crypt Keeper or something like that. So that's something else when you're doing thumbnails, is if you start to get into the habit of making sort of very dramatic poses with this stuff, it can just be difficult to read. Like if I had a character with a big head that's sort of foreshortened, punching towards the screen like Superman or Astroman, right, with one leg up and one leg down, it's like I don't get a very good sense of what their whole body looks like, and I can know what I meant, but the client won't necessarily know what you mean, right? And so is it an effective way of communicating? No, it's not. And I mean, put it yourself in the place of the art directors. Like if you ask for some thumbnails and then you get a whole bunch of stuff that only the artist could read, or maybe half of those poses are only something the artist could read. You're not meeting your goals of trying to design this thing. You're now kind of having to get that person to go back and actually unfold that character so that you can see what's going on, and then you can actually make a decision. So it's better to leave these things more neutral. It's not to say that you can't have like weight shifting on hips and have the characters turned slightly, but again, the whole purpose is to see the silhouette. So any obfuscation of that is going to be a bad time, right, for certain people. You might luck out and a few of them are legible, but you want to kind of keep the drama to a minimum. So just taking stock here, seeing how I feel. I kind of, the thing with the smaller characters in here, and something that that you get with Dora is a lot of the times when you make characters like that, it's better suited to a more simple design in terms of some of the details within. And that's not a bad thing, but, you know, is that what we want? So for me, my paranormal investigator, Gora, let's say, I would maybe want her to be a little bit aged up, not sort of like homunculus or child proportioned. So I would think instead of something like this, which is a little bit more beholden to Dora, I'm kind of gravitating to something in here, in this range. This is maybe getting a bit big for our purposes. I feel like it's just somewhere in that range, even this one in here, where I'm getting kind of an extra large head, but with a more, you know, if we were to think of like Dora being a kid, I'd maybe be aging it up to teenage body proportions or young adult body proportions rather than necessarily even going to adult proportions, right? I think that that's a little bit more my vibe. So let's try one where we're kind of thinking about that. Maybe she does start to have more of a indication of some aged up proportions in there. Something like this. So it's very similar to this one over here. Now is a really good time to make sure we're labeling it, because I'm starting to use things like words like this or that over there, right? It's really hard to communicate that to clients. So it's always good to label your work. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So lucky 13. So I feel like something in here is maybe a little bit better for what I'm imagining, right? Or what I'm feeling. And it'll be different for each of you when you're kind of building something. It's like, how does that feel? How does that come across in there? And I don't know. I think I like that a little bit more in terms of some of the shapes that are going on and some of the spaces and proportions that we have. So at that point, you know, it happens that it's a 13, right? Spooky number. Unlucky 13. And I think I'm pretty good to go with that. So, you know, it's the thumbnail stage. So I'm not taking this and I'm not saying it has to look exactly like that, but out of the body forms that I've built, that's probably going to be the one that I like the most, right? So I think that it's still has some room for movement, but I would do that sort of now in the iterative sketch phase rather than kind of trying to work that out in this tiny little thumbnail, right? The thumbnail has done its job for us, right? We've got a range in there. I might go on to do 40 of these things, right? I might go on to do, you know, multiple passes. You may run into clients that are confused with what they want, right? So as they see things, they might meander one way than the other. That's kind of frustrating, but it can happen. Not everybody will have a firm grasp on what they want to achieve, right? So food for thought. But to keep things going, let's just work with 13 here. And so what I'm going to do with 13 is I'm going to grab that, copy that, paste that. I'm just going to kind of put that up in the corner there. So this is where we can start to get into a little bit more of the medium detail, medium to small, but we'll want to maybe just focus on some of the variants in some of that medium detail in the body. So let's kind of start sketching loosely. This brush is maybe a bit crunchy or chunky in there. the monkey as well. Maybe we'll get to that. I kind of want to, you don't want to focus necessarily on too many things. The monkey, in terms of how it relates to Dora, is not so important. It's a lot of similar shape language. The monkey has this sort of distortion and proportion differences, and it's just a little pet, right? And so we could definitely make one of those, but one thing at a time, right? When I would really want to establish that key character first, and then anything that is tertiary, secondary or tertiary can happen based on what we decide with this key character, right? Because that key character, that primary character, has to read properly before you build the rest of the ship, right? So let's go with that. Maybe I'll try a brush like this. Yeah, maybe this is a little bit better for our purposes. Let's just undo that. I'm gonna put that thumbnail on its own layer and lock it, because I don't want to delete it if I screw up the line work here. So if we're dealing with a body form like this, let's just kind of rough that out again. Are we going to start to see a neck come out there? Like at this point, I can also decide, do I want the hips to be that wide, right? Maybe. So Dora has a backpack, maybe you'd want to switch that up so that your character doesn't have all of the exact same things, right? So what I might do is, it might be fun to have her have maybe like a messenger bag or something like that. Still, I mean, very similar things, but I don't want to just be lifting everything from Dora. If we're doing the whole idea of a investigator, right? Maybe she also has sort of equipment on a belt, right? So I can kind of start roughing out shapes like that now. Kind of at this point, we'd maybe want to start thinking about how her feet come together. Are they really kind of big clown feet, right? How big are her hands relative? So I might kind of start roughing those out here. Made a fairly round head on there. We don't have to carry that through either, right? We could go with something where maybe there's almost like a flat part on the head or the jaw. I can start figuring out where on the head the eyes are gonna go. We could have eyes that are really close together, a really long nose, and a mouth down here, right? Or we could have eyes that are massive and low on the head with the mouth up here, right? Or kind of move those around as well. So you can see at this stage, you don't want to be kind of fixating on one thing for the design. Maybe she's seen a lot of stuff and she's sort of got this 1,000-yard stare, right? It depends on like how funny do you want it to be? Like, is there going to be a lot of like is it aged up, right? And I can start kind of thinking about this in terms of Dora. So Dora has this kind of distinctive bowl cut, which I've always found interesting as a design, because it looks like a bowl cut, or her hair parted in the middle. So like, do we want to do something like that? I mean, we could have her have a mohawk and a mullet or something like that. Like, what would a paranormal investigator have necessarily? It's hard to say. thinking about those arms. I might kind of turn those into curves with some flat lines to echo or to contrast those curves on the inside. I might turn this into a rib cage and then have a more of like a hip waist ratio vibe going on in there. Or do we want kind of like big hair on her, right? Maybe she's been terrified and her hair's gone white, right? She might have spiky hair. She has sort of like a white streak coming out. It could be that she has hair that reacts to every situation, right? Like we could get into thinking about her hair is almost like the monkey, right? It's just like, it's very expressive in there, right? That could be fun. If I were going to be doing that, then that's a bit of a design process in and of itself, because we'd want to go and establish what it looked like, what it looks like when it goes through different emotions. But that could be fun. She could have arms that are kind of more like these little sculptures called monies that you can paint. It's kind of like almost like a doll arm where it goes out to these really basic arms in there. I kind of like that instead of having this strained, pinched shape. She might even have tattoos, right? She could have tattoos kind of flowing around. Maybe they're all like demonic runes and kind of semi sort of symbolic shapes that she helps ward off the bad guys with. The reason I got that idea is like the negative space in here where I put the rough sketch of the messenger bag kind of looked like that arm that I was talking about, and I don't know, I think that would be fun. One of the things that I could do is I could follow as a tangent some of this negative space from the hip up into the shoulder as the design for that. So her arm could be a little bit more curved as it moves down into the finger, right? And then we could have something like that in there, which I don't know, I'm digging that. As we move down into the leg, I'm thinking about maybe adding a little bit of like subtle anatomical hints, right? Like the heel of the hand instead of just something that runs straight into fingers, right, as a mitten. And it could be something where we see a little hint of the patella on her knees here and there. It might be that I give a subtle hint to the calves as well, as a way of kind of working that out. So maybe we go with, I know Dora has shorts, but maybe we go more with kind of like a Tomb Raider vibe where she's got like these kind of hiking short things going on. So there's a lot of lines being kind of laid in over top of one another here. So, you know, you want to eventually get back in there and clean that stuff up. Maybe we'll give her a bit smaller feet in there. Maybe she has a bun or something. Okay, so let's make a copy of that and just clean that up, see what that looks like. So I'm making a copy to save my progress in case whatever we do here just doesn't pan out. So I'm just going to drop that in opacity. And I'm just going to go in and clean some of that up. Again, at this stage, I don't even want to kind of start solidifying that line work because I want to maybe try some other things with her. Doc Ock and Spider-Verse. Absolutely. A boycott because it's good for exploring. Yeah, that could definitely be something that that we throw in there. Hi Sean, it's going well. How are you doing? Hopefully you're doing well. The proportion thing, I wanted to age her up, remember, like young adult, not like tween or child so much, right? But I don't want her to feel like a kind of worn out adult like me. Right? I don't want the proportions to be right there, because remember guys, Dora is only useful as much as I want her to be. I'm not making Dora the Explorer, right? I'm using that as a way to kind of make my own character. So at some point I'm leaving that behind. I don't want to bring it with me, right? Because I mean, I would put more of that stuff in there if I wanted it to be a Dora ripoff, right? Or let's say heavily inspired by Dora. For me, I'm not that interested in that. Just the idea of a little explorer character. And we abandon the rest. Like, I want her to have a little bit of kind of like, even a bit of the bag under the eyes, not to make it, I mean, you got to be careful there because it can start to feel like an old person, but more of like, that would be the only line work that I'd put in her face in terms of a wrinkle or a crease to make it look like she's seen some stuff, right? So I'm definitely aging up. Put a t-shirt on her. Not sure if I want a t-shirt though. Kind of feel like a singlet would be a bit better on her. Maybe she'd need to be more like a Tomb Raider in that respect, where she's got kind of you know, like athletic fitting clothing on. Because the kid's not gonna have tattoos. Well, I mean, I would assume. You know, do we give her a nose? Maybe. She'd have really long hair that kind of flows behind her like a ghost. Maybe she's almost like a Dracula type, right? The only problem I would foresee with that is like it'd be super cumbersome to work with for anybody that would have to animate it, either traditionally or otherwise, right? So might kind of scrap that for now. I do kind of like the idea of like something shorter, you know, and then with that hair shape, do we do something something interesting in terms of that shape language? Maybe she's shortcut. You could really kind of make this more adult like and kind of make it look like she's super disturbed and she's like cut her hair all off or something like that. Just depends on what the vibe would be. the sweep idea. She might have some sort of crazy mohawk. Have the side of her head shaved. That might be something that you'd tap into as well, as like how edgy do you want to be, how relevant fashion-wise do you want to be. She could have her head shaved, like the first season of Stranger Things with Eleven, right? That could be pretty fun. Like she could wear a hat, I suppose, or she might have goggles or something like that to, like night vision to see in the dark. Like how techy is she gonna be, right? We could have a huge set of goggles, or they might be her own kind of night vision goggles. She's got kind of hair wrapped around. She might have a ponytail. That might be a little bit easier for us to handle. There might be kind of like a white streak in through there. Raise that pelvis up a bit. Maybe her little utility belt's a little bit smaller. Slim that arm down a bit. Have I always grab it? You asked me this last time. On Monday, actually. Don't know if you remember that. And what I said then was no. Or, well, what I said was not necessarily. In this case, we had Dora. In the other case, say the zombie, that was a random selection. So it seems in these streams that I do, but not necessarily. It just depends. I tend to end up drawing a lot more males for work, right, when I'm working with clients. You know, I did a lot of male characters for Resident Evil, and then lots of male characters for the mobile game. I can never remember that mobile game I worked on. Zombie game. So I'll do both. But I mean, that said, I mean, this is exactly what I said last time. It's like it's more something that I would spend time learning. As I'm male, I'm more familiar with the structures, right? So in that regard, I suppose I could say yeah. But am I averse to drawing male characters? No, not at all. I'm gonna try and shrink that neck down a little bit. See if her head sits a bit lower. That feels a bit better, so she doesn't have this longer giraffe neck in there. Yeah, I like that. We see enough of it, not enough of an overlap there that I get the sense of it, and then I feel good about that. We're kind of giving her these huge mittens for hands, so you know, is that something we want to do where her feet are tiny, right? Certainly up to us. I don't mind it. You know, if we give her big kind of clown shoes, it can kind of make her feel, well, like a clown, floppy, goofy, right? And that's maybe not something I want to portray in this design, at least, right? So I'm thinking about those shorts. I think the shorts would be good for like a big kind of cuff, so I'm just gonna erase some of this stuff in here. So like, how far down do you want the cuff to be though? I think anything that starts to become too long would feel like an encumbrance. Like you don't see a lot of runners running around with big long cuffs to their pants. I'm gonna actually take another stab at these legs now that I'm messing with them a bit. She's kind of tilted out this way a little bit, so I want to move that foot. Could be something that's a little bit straighter towards us. And I am keeping the legs together in a fairly basic pose. We can kind of take this arm out a little bit more, right, and see this finger kind of wrap around this way, as she is turning in that direction. I'm reorganizing the feet there because I want the main mass of the body to sit over the feet. It's starting to tilt a little bit one way. So I'm still working things out, as you can see, quite a bit here. I'm not deciding that everything has to look a certain way yet, because we're still in that sketch phase, and you can imagine sort of putting out some sketches, asking your client or your art director, you know, like, what do you think about this direction? What do you think about that direction? And then they can respond, and you can switch gears and whatnot. You know, I'm still not totally sold on the hands being this look, right? But I'm investigating what that could look like. Stylization is a tough one though, because it's like, what rules are you setting up for exaggerations or simplifications in here, right? Do we want these shapes to be a lot more curved versus straight, or just fully curvilinear all the way around the body, right? Like for instance, in the cheek here, we go a bit of a curve to a more extreme direction shift, and then into another curve. So instead of drawing straight lines, do we draw these kind of curved lines whenever we're drawing forms, right? Or do we keep it curvaceous throughout with this indication of more aggressive angle shift, right? Is that one of the rules for what you're developing? Yeah, I could have really big working gloves, fingerless gloves on one hand and big sort of welding mitt on the other, right? Because maybe she has some crazy ghost catching machine, or I guess, let's say, spirit detector that's like built by her. She may be kind of more of like an engineer type, which could be cool. Some of the undulations in the lower, I think, are maybe a bit too lifelike. I'm getting the feeling of that anyway, right? Because we are simplifying the arms quite a bit. So it might be that we just kind of avoid doing too much of that subtle hinting at anatomy. I also kind of want to park some of her facial features. Well, this is what we could maybe do here. It's a rough sketch. Do a second version here, where I'm just going to lower the opacity on that and kind of riff on that one then. Separate layer. She has big gloves and big boots. It would get balanced together. Yeah, it could be balanced. It could be too balanced, right? I mean, when people say balance in terms of design, I think a lot of, well, not a lot of people, but I think people can get confused on whether or not even balance on something in terms of I put a weight here and I put a weight here, that's always the best thing to do. The problem with that is that if these things are too similar, they don't offer anything interesting in terms of dynamism, right? And so what some people can be talking about when they're talking about balance is, say you put a nice big block of something here, for instance, just as an example, and then you put a grouping of more intense detail that's smaller over here. This has more interest, but this is bigger, right? So that those things can actually have a balance that isn't just equal shapes. Because you know, you can start to get something, Steven Silver talks about this, laddering, where when you look at a ladder shape, it's one of the most boring things that you can see, because it's just everything is uniform, everything has the same proportions everywhere, right? And then that can lead to it can lead to something that reads fine, but it can also be something that's just visually boring to look at, right? So you want to be sure that, you know, if you're going to add big gloves, if you add big boots, then are you saying the same thing but they're different objects, right? That's the thing. That's what's tough. You can add, say with her, we're giving more weight to the middle of her body than we are the top and the bottom of her, right? And so in and of itself, that can be an expression that is balanced, right? But balance is such a vague term to apply to these things. That's why whenever I hear feedback in these situations where people say, oh, and to add balance here, I mean, what are you talking about? Are you talking about weight over feet, or weight feeling like it's going to tip off? Or are you talking about visual weight, shape, proportion differentials, right? Balance can be a lot of different things. Color balance, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's a vague term, but you're in the right headspace of kind of thinking about, like, what's the balance like? How are we achieving it, right? And then what's nice about that is you can have fun with it, right? It's like, well, what if I want a little bit of a perceived imbalance to create some dynamism somehow, right? I don't mean kind of positioning a character like this where they look like they're going to fall over, right? That's imbalance in terms of weight on a plane. So, food for thought anyway. So, let's actually pump this up a bit. Let's go find her. Let's pop her back to full strength here. I wanted to move the face shapes around a little bit. Maybe we scale them up. Put them in the face like that. Like, does that feel a bit better? Like if we're taking up more room? I'm not stressing if it doesn't. All right, it's just something that we can work with. Maybe we take a little bit of those legs. What if we extended those by a hint? Not too bad. Maybe we could play with this one with the arms a little bit. Let's actually get rid of that hair too, because I've already got similar things going on in the other one, so I don't want to say exactly the same stuff over here. It's kind of dark hair up top. Maybe she's got kind of like a... We can speak a bit to the Dora vibe. But maybe she's got kind of more of like a bob. And this one maybe she's got kind of a shirt. Like the old Tomb Raider, Lara Croft. Those shorts coming up this way. So that might be a nice a shape difference in there instead of kind of being like hugging the hips necessarily. Let's get that other arm out of there. Her shorts could be something that are more of like almost like a skirt shape. They kind of move up into her body, and then her legs stick out. Maybe like we could resolve something in there that might look like that. But like, does it get too big on the hips? Maybe it does. Maybe she has kind of like boots. Now let's kind of go back to the smaller wrists with her, and maybe she has smaller hands as well. That's a possibility. Not bad. Let's make another one of her. Let's chop some stuff up again. Maybe more wide-eyed. So the smaller the eyes get, the more this is going to feel like an adult as you kind of like grow into your skull. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because we're aging it up. And again, I'm not placing so many harsh restrictions on myself that I would need to say no to any of this. She might kind of have more extreme eyebrows. I'll give the eyelashes a bit more play. Like when we get bigger pupils, what happens there, right? Let this emerge. I don't mind that so much. Maybe these are kind of like interesting bangs coming off of her head. And she's got a, she might kind of have like more of a angular vibe overall. Maybe we can kind of play with some straight versus curved. If I were doing that, would I go back in and kind of work some of that through the rest of her body, right? I could definitely do that here. So let's take her down quite a bit because I want to investigate the angularity of her in this version. So she's secretly taking mushrooms. Swipe number Psyche. Yeah. No capes. Small cape? We can put a cape if we want. Maybe it's a bed sheet, right? Maybe she's sort of like disturbed from being a kid, and she's started her young adult life from that point where she was spooked by a monster under her bed. So she's, or maybe her monster under her bed stole her favorite toy, and she's on this sort of like adventure to get it back, and that's maybe the bad guy. But she has to kind of learn about the underworld. M. Night Shyamalan, nice. Okay, so we have these kind of interesting shapes going on, and we can investigate them. When I'm doing this kind of thing, I really want to tie into whether or not I want to go those directions, right? So I am going to grab a bit of a different brush here, because I need it to not be as kind of loose. Well, actually, let's see how it paints. Yeah, I don't want it to be as wide on the stroke, so I am going to go back to a brush that's more like that, because I want to see if this will work, or how it works. I'm going to come back in here. We've got a new layer, right? And I can kind of start investigating some of this stuff. So let's see so sometimes what I use when I want to do some more kind of specific line work, I'm not sure this is actually going to work because I updated Photoshop, and like always with updating Photoshop, not everything works, but this sometimes allows you to work with a bit better of a smoothing technique than Photoshop smoothing, and it's called Lazy Nizumi. And so you can go into smoothing, pressure. Any of these smoothing pressures can work, but speed pressure is what I like to use. But I'm not saying that any of that will work very well. Not quite sure it is. Let's use pulled string to see if this is even operating properly. Nah, it's not. So I'll have to update Lazy Nizumi. For our purposes, we can always just turn smoothing on in Photoshop on. Just see sort of like how it's gonna kind of smooth some of those lines. Yeah, it's good, great plugin. Should it be in Photoshop already? Yes. And I mean, they have a smoothing option, but it's, let's not kid ourselves that Photoshop is the best drawing tool in the world. It can do the trick in terms of drawing, but I'm kind of just gonna get in here and start kind of maybe working with some of these things, you know. Like, would that be better as like a sweep in there? We've got some of these angles being a little bit sharper, so you know, maybe we could do something with that in here. Which I don't mind. It's kind of interesting enough. I might want to bring this to a sharper angle though, the back side there. Her ear could be another one that's maybe a little bit more sharp as it moves outward. There's too much smoothing on that. So the reason I'm slowing down and taking this into consideration instead of being as sketchy as I was before is I happened onto something here in terms of a shape language that I'm really intrigued by. And so I'm allowing that thing to work and starting to kind of investigate how it might come across in there. Kind of really trying to work in the curved to sharp angle shift. see that that's just tucked in to the pants, or to the shorts, I guess. So yeah, I'm kind of digging this. Not bad. I still don't mind the larger eyes, but I think the smaller eyes are more in tune with what I'm looking for in the face. Right, aging it up again. Really getting away from the old Dora. So some of these things I'm kind of just trying out. I won't necessarily keep all of these attempts or these strokes, right? See what works for myself. Yeah, we could go with something instead of like a really small belt. We could go with something that's really big, right? So that she has this really kind of massive utility belt on her. Well, maybe not massive, but big. Let's move these over. I can run into that habit where I start painting too close to the edge and I start kind of cramping the drawing. So it's always good to move it back. Yeah, definitely. You could go super dark with it. That would be fun. We'll keep it PG now, though. But I mean, like, gang, get out there and draw your own Dora. You don't have to steer me around, right? You guys can do this and always show me what you got, your version, as long as it's safe for work. Well, safe for stream. I would be more inclined personally to probably make it darker, but again, you gotta make sure things are appropriate. So some of these angles are just tests for me to figure out sort of like how it would work. You know, do I want to go that way? This way, kind of thing. So the curves, I think, are definitely useful for my purposes. The curve versus sort of angular vibe. Actually put that foot back a little bit in there. It's now kind of me deciding with each one of these, like, where would I put the curvatures? Where would I put any sort of square aspects, right? Figure out that shoulder. I feel like that's going to be moving a little bit further back. This will be a little bit more flat in there. Something with here I kind of want to investigate with this shape is actually chopping a bit out of the torso, making that a bit shorter. Don't want her to get too long. It's a bit better to me, at least in this iteration, right? It's not paramount that I nail the final design at all in here. So mag light or something. The ponytail's starting to annoy me there. I think I could omit that for now. She might even just have like these bangs with kind of like spiky hair in behind. Keep it short. Keep it short. So that's not too bad. The feet need to be kind of giving a little bit more volume in there, but I don't mind that. Definitely something to it. I'm just gonna go and get rid of that now. Let's collapse that down. So there's our set so far. I'm starting to kind of work a little bit more into the design of the clean line design of the third one there. So let's do our due diligence for client's sake. Yeah, I mean I think it's enough distance to the base of the skull for me, or the jaw. I mean, in number 2 we get really close there, so it starts to feel really really super flat. If we're dealing with an animation that won't have any sort of representation of the character in 3D, like a 3D model, you can get away with cheating a ton, right? You'll see lots of cartoons where almost like the face is flat and the head turns and the face stays, the expression stays flat, right? They kind of have an orientation left and right. And that's great for 2D, right? If I'm building something that might turn into 3D at some point, you know, that might be something that you'd consider actually having to think about the volume under her chin that goes back to her neck, right? All along this lower section in here. So she's got a beard now. So I'm kind of more inclined to do that. Maybe out of habit, but also a lot of stuff gets turned into 3D nowadays. So, food for thought. So even with the costume here, I don't necessarily love the costume. It might be something where I think about that she's disturbed and she wears this or wears that. Maybe this works a bit better for the character design in that this way or that way, right? I can always change that stuff. What I'm kind of gunning for is these overall forms that we're building, so that's believable or not believable, so that we can start to establish that shape language. Like, it might be better that we still cut out to this original sort of hip where it's more kind of angular into a curve. I still kind of like that. Some of these details that are poking off are not necessarily, they're an attempt at you know, a visualization, but again, we don't have to decide on anything at this point. We're all kind of just building this stuff up to see what feels good. So yeah, head shape's not too bad. We could probably even move that mouth, those lips and those mouths over by a hair. See if that gives us more of a perspective. And might just compress this eye by a hint. It's not doing too bad there. I could start to sketch in maybe some of the value of her hair. Like it can be sometimes hard to visualize this character the way you want it to unless you do start to put some value in. Sketching phase can definitely be that part where you do that. I think if we're dealing with a paranormal investigator type, we might want to kind of envision maybe she always dresses in super dark kind of clothing, right? Almost like Wednesday from, well, I guess any of the Addams Family characters, right? These kind of supernatural horror types, right? Kind of make her feel really dark. She might have one white eyebrow. That might be fun, and that white streak of hair through. To make it feel like she's been frightened permanently by something. Kind of almost like the Bride of Frankenstein, right? So we could use a little bit of that flavor in there to create this sense in her. Yeah. Let's look at some of these new messages here. Twitch, everything is offensive. Whole world is 4 years old. Well, I mean, just turn on any chat in Twitch and you'll see the quality of, for a popular streamer, you'll see the quality of comments going on. And, I wouldn't blame Twitch in that regard. It can be pretty annoying or toxic. When you get to the point where the chat's just streaming by and people are trying to spam emojis and memes and, so that's the problem with these platforms is you got to manage them somehow, right? And it can be pretty difficult. I see it from that side, obviously because of the CG spectrum, right? But yeah, Indiana Jones, like, I'm okay with that vibe, that sort of Tomb Raider vibe, because I want it to be more of an adventure. Like, Dora is wearing school clothes and a backpack because that makes sense for Dora, right? In terms of us, like I said, I'm not too beholden on the costume at this point. I'm kind of just plugging those things in there based on sort of a general sense of that adventure type clothing. It may... with any character design, I might spend some time digging into, like, well, how do we want her to come across in terms of, like, where she came from in history, came from immediately in the story context from where we've picked it up, and then what do we want to project? Like, has she, we have that sort of asylum vibe. She could be in a straitjacket, right? That's a very specific thing that you're trying to say at that point, where I would want her to be able to feel like she's able to go on these adventures, that she's wearing clothes that make sense for that, right? And so in a costume design pass, you could start to kind of work some of those things out. I'm still kind of trying to figure out body form and some of the shape language in there. So just kind of getting some clothing in there to look at what that might be is a little bit more functional for me for right now. But certainly it's not what I'd be signing off on, right? And your client may even insert themselves into the process right now and say, like, oh, well, we know what that clothing looks like. But for yourself, say for portfolio pieces or personal pieces, you know, take one thing at a time so that you're not trying to solve every single problem all in the same drawing, right? Like I could imagine her having sort of even like torn jeans or something and being a little bit more civilian-like, I guess. She could have flip-flops on. It could look like really haphazard that she's just been thrown into this thing, right? And that might have to do, maybe this is all in her mind, and sort of it's like whenever she was transposed into that state, you know, she took the clothes with her, right? Could be that she's in pajamas and sort of like she's going through a dream. And then that could be a cool sort of story element, like she's trapped in her own nightmare, right? And then that's the clothes she wears. She could always conjure new clothing up and stuff like that, which could be pretty cool. So yeah. My eyes look normal with coffee. Without coffee, they're just closed. She looks like me on coffee with her eyes. Yeah, nice. I didn't save my work. Thanks for reminding me. So we'll just put that in here. There we go. Okay, so like how many of these would we end up doing, right? That's always the question. Like how much time would you spend on something like this? Well, personally, I would say as much time as you have, right? But in pre-production, you don't tend to get a ton of time to work things out, because like time is of the essence when you're on a project, right? So you'll spend as much time as possible trying to work these things out now, because just getting into render and finishing like finished pieces, that's useful. But if the original, my students hear me repeat this ad nauseum, if the foundation is weak, it doesn't matter how pretty the house is, it'll fall over at some point or some way, shape, or form, right? If that foundation is weak. So you don't want to rush too much into that stuff. Like, could I produce another 3 of these? Potentially, yeah, potentially. I'm kind of homing in on something that I'm enjoying here in the set. I'm almost still liking that that almost like skirt shape, right? Where we kind of cap off the hip region and then have the legs come down out of that. Almost sort of like a tennis skirt, right? Where it's sort of like one piece with like a belt. You can imagine with a belt. But I think the shorts still is a good idea. But that could be an interesting sort of shape for her, right? So maybe be like expanding that down a little bit more for her. And I'm erasing lines that I've already set up because it's not important to me to keep that stuff. I'm confident in my drawing skill, right? I can always go back and do that stuff. I'm just starting to think about how these things will work, right? And so like I can start roughing those things out in terms of like her, as some have mentioned, her Indiana Jones vibe. Maybe the cuff goes a little bit wider so it does actually feel like shorts. It's a nice way to cap those legs though, I think. Thinking about the upper torso, right? Chest regions, so kind of simplifying some of those forms a little bit. Arm can come out of there. I mean, would she have gear hanging off of her at all? Potentially, right? Like I love the idea that she can kind of reach into a bag and pull out all sorts of strange instruments, and you know, if we went with that vibe that she is trapped in her own nightmare, which I kind of like, then this bag is sort of just her conjure tool, right? It could even be that, like, I don't want to take the backpack idea, but it could be like a backpack that's themed somehow. Maybe it's like a monster backpack, like a cuddly monster backpack kind of thing, or maybe it is just a hip pouch or something like that, right? Interesting. But that would maybe be the next thing to think about with her, insofar as, you know, like, how's that going to stand off of her frame? Because right now, if we were to look at her silhouette, let's turn off this and move these up. Let's just kind of fill that in. Oops, there we go. And see what the vibe is for the silhouette. I don't have to have razor sharp precision here. You're just gonna kind of go and peek at what that looks like. So it's like the shapes under the armpit, the upper torso, that sort of neck connection in there. Got the flashlight here. That doesn't feel too bad. We get the original sort of shape as we saw here, right? The head became a little bit bigger, but that's fine. And we get kind of like a nice read. So if I start putting on top of that a backpack or a hip bag, you can start to see how that stuff becomes a little bit difficult to read. So it's not necessarily bad that you do that, but if you were really relying on a nice easy read for whatever the format of entertainment you're working for, animation, film, whatever, right, video game, then that is definitely something you want to take into account, right? Because if it's better that she reach into a small pocket, or she just imagines something into existence, or her accessory or sidekick is the thing that produces these elements, then that might be a little bit better for her, right? But you can decide that context. I mean, especially if you're building these things on your own, if that makes more sense to you, and in that case, right? So, food for thought. Have I tried Clip Studio? Yeah, absolutely. Clip Studio is really nice to use. The UI is a little bit dated, but I've actually started playing around with it a lot more for drawing, and even some painting, because Photoshop is a little bit sort of weak in some of those areas, at least for the way that I like drawing, say in Procreate. Photoshop doesn't have that same feel for drawing. I think some of the painting elements in Photoshop are still good. The file handling in Photoshop is really good. Colorization is also good in Photoshop, but yeah, some of those other sort of more, let's say, media simulation qualities of the stroke pressure, I just find that I'd never quite get the feel that I want personally out of it. And so I do go looking at time and now and then for a better option, and Clip Studio is really good. I mean, Clip Studio was built for manga and anime, so basically illustration, right? Photoshop was built for messing around with photographs, and it slowly over time became this paint package. Well, it became a tool that people use to paint and illustrate. So, you know, when somebody has the illustrator in mind from the get-go, you know, they're going to be making tools that are a little bit more useful in that case. You know, if I started using Clip Studio a lot, I probably wouldn't stop using Photoshop. I would just bounce back and forth between them, and use them for different reasons. Like a while, like years and years and years ago, I started to get into Sketchbook Pro a little bit more for the sketching and some of the ruler tools, and I really liked that, but I ended up not using it so much after a while. It's just because one of the problems for me is that I've used Photoshop for so long that I know how it works and I know where to go to do this or to do that. It's just the way some of those tools work can sometimes be a bit egregious. For instance, like sort of blending with a smudge tool on larger scales. I'll save this. On larger scales can really, if I press and hold, you'll see that it's just struggling to render everything, right? Rightfully so. I mean, this piece is 45 by 4500 pixels, and so I've taken a giant brush with all that information, and I've used a mechanic where it's meant to affect other pixels underneath as I stroke through, and it's simulating all of that. So it's a lot of math going on right now to be able to blend some of this stuff down. And you can see Photoshop's just sitting there thinking, right, while it's trying to finish this. I just went like this, I pressed and went like that, right? So for me, sometimes on a larger piece, I want to actually do that, right? And so I feel like I know that a computer having to process this, or a program having to process this, is a complex thing. But I find that even in smaller areas with smaller brushes, that it still struggles with that kind of thing, right? So so that's sort of like I look for an option, especially as the images become bigger and bigger for clients, and as resolutions get higher. I just look for a solution to that that's not this system, right? Because I find it a bit clunky. And you know, you'll even get this in Procreate. I mean, that's on a tablet, right? But as soon as you make your smudge tools really large, you know, it's gonna have to go through and work out the math on all of that stuff. But I find that it just does a better job of it, and it's on a tablet, right? So so that's sort of the vibe. I mean, it's still going, right? And so if I had, this is a pretty complex brush, sort of this rain texture brush that I'm using. But it's just, think about that in your workflow, right? I'm trying to get this big thing kind of blended down real quick. I'd have to go into maybe selecting it with a feather on my marquee selection tool, and then going to a Gaussian blur or a median blur or blend. For some people, it's really useful to do that. For me, I would say, you know, it's not really a part of my workflow, and it's not that I couldn't change my workflow. It's just like you look for tools that complement your way of making art. And so I think, yeah, super long way to get back to the whole idea that Clip Studio is a nice alternative. They've also got some really cool posing tools and 3D object tools, and a whole catalog of models that you can bring in and pose in a scene if you want to, you know, pose a character, put environment elements in. It's not, you know, some of the objects you bring in kind of like shonky a bit, but it's still really cool that they have that option. You know, otherwise I would use something like DAZ 3D to mock up a bunch of characters in a scene with maybe some environment primitives to kind of get a sense of moving the camera and see like what I want to design in that regard. So it's cool that they start to integrate that, you know. So And even then, I'd probably use DAZ 3D more than I'd use their modeling program, or their posing program, just because I know it. And some of the handles and movement elements within that program are a little bit easier to use, I find. And then there's still a lot of, because it's a Japanese company, a lot of the, a Japanese company that builds Clip Studio. There's some stuff in there that I just can't read, right? So, but anyway. Yeah, I know, right? I should have maybe pressed that long, but that's okay. So, I mean, we can still see the silhouette in here. So I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think I would add at this point other stuff hanging off of her, like Dora's backpack. I like the idea of potentially giving that over to something that is her sidekick or an accessory. You know, it could be like an imaginary friend or a ghost that follows her around. Maybe she projects the ghost out of the flashlight, right? And then she can tell it like a genie to, she rubs the flashlight and then the genie pops out and she can ask for stuff, right? Or she can scan things with the flashlight. That's a little bit better for me. It's like a 3D printer almost. So I might go with something like that instead, because I do like this her silhouette right now. It's close to our thumb, and I think it's something we can definitely work with. So, well, Photoshop continues to struggle here, and just prove my point. You know, we'll wrap up the stream at this juncture, and so yeah, I mean, with these weeks, gang, you know, take part, start building your own characters, maybe your own design briefs. You can follow along with me, but it's really good for you to kind of like practice that stuff. You can hear sort of what I'm rolling through in my head, and then you know, you can make some of those decisions as well. So thanks for hanging out. I'll be here waiting for Photoshop to finish by the time my next class rolls around. But do try some of this stuff out, some of these methods. Use existing IPs for prompts, not being derivative of them, but just for prompts if ever you're stuck on designing anything. And it can be a really nice way to kind of work through some of that stuff. So yeah, have a good weekend. We'll be back on Monday to finish off our bounty hunter / outlaw type character. And we started to establish some color on that, so I'm excited to get back to that and work on that. Otherwise, we'll be back next Thursday with some more of Gora, the paranormal explorer. So tune in then. All right, take care, everyone, and we will see you next time.